Welcome to Romans, God's Solution to Our Problem, a devotional series by Sumo Youth. Make sure you've got a pen and your copy of Romans with you. And, if you haven't already, pause the video and pray that Jesus speaks to you through His Word today.
Welcome to day 3, guys. Final day of week 1. So congrats if you're keeping up and this is the end of your first week. End of the first week, we're going to be looking at the end of chapter 1 of Romans today. So that's verse 18 through to the end of the chapter, or day 3 if you're following along in your booklets. Now remember, from the first sections we've read, the book of Romans is going to be about the gospel. The gospel concerning Jesus, the gospel which is the power of God for salvation. The gospel which is God's solution to our problem. Now, if the gospel is God's solution to our problem, then the place that Paul is going to start as he unpacks the gospel and as he encourages us to believe the gospel and live our life responding to the gospel, the place he's going to start is by looking at what is our problem which God needs to solve. So actually the passage we're looking at today is quite heavy and a little bit depressing. But it's the place which we're going to start so that we can understand just how amazing the gospel is, the good news about Jesus. We're reading, like I said, chapter 1 verses 18 to 32, and it's starting off the gospel by what is the problem which Jesus needs to solve. Before you read that, here's the questions we want you to keep in mind as you read through the passage. Again, they'll be on the screen for you to pause in a moment. The first question is, why do all people have a responsibility to know and acknowledge God? Why is everyone without excuse? Secondly, what is it which human beings choose to worship instead of their Creator? What do people choose to worship instead of their Creator? And finally, your third question, what is the right and fair and just punishment for people who choose to live in rebellion against God? What is the punishment for people who choose to live in rebellion against God? Have a read of the end of Romans chapter 1, answer those questions, and then hit play again on this video when you're ready to talk about the answers. So it's a pretty depressing little section of the Bible there, isn't it? A pretty bleak outlook for humanity and the world as far as Romans chapter 1 verses 18 to 32 are concerned. How did you go looking at those questions? The first question, why do all people have a responsibility to acknowledge God? Well, Paul makes that clear, doesn't he? He says that based on the world that God's made, the way he has shown himself through his creation, that it should be clear to everyone that there is a God, and certain truths about God should be known by everyone. And Paul says that means that man is without excuse. That every person should be able to look around them and see the spectacular universe that God's made and realize that he exists. Secondly, what do people choose then to worship instead of God? Well, instead of worshipping the Creator, people instead choose to worship created things. Back in the first century when Paul wrote this, that might have meant things as simple as a piece of wood that had been carved into an idol, or a particular stone, a particular gem, something made of gold or bronze, some kind of idol. For us it might be other people who've been created by God. It might be nature around us. It might be the stuff which we like to buy. All of these different good things in God's creation we end up worshipping instead of worshipping the Creator who made them. And the final question, what is the punishment which is due for people who continually live rebelling against God, worshipping the good things He's made and enjoying those, but not worshipping and enjoying Him? Well, the end of our passage said that people actually know that the punishment deserved for doing those things is death. The punishment for rejecting the God who gives life is to have that life taken away. And yet, and this really hits us, I think, not only does our world do these things, reject God and worship His creation instead of Him, but it approves of others who do that. You know, that's the world we live in. Sometimes it's actually cooler to reject God and to sin against Him than it is to do the right thing. I'm sure you can think of heaps of situations that happens around you. And just in case there was a chance of us reading this passage and thinking it's all about other people, worse people, bad people, people thousands of years ago, or people around us, the them, not the us, remember from a couple of days ago. Now when we read these lists, it's hard to remove ourselves from it, isn't it? Because even though it talks about those who are murderers, it also talks about those who don't obey their parents. And these things are all put into one list, and we're kind of left realizing that it doesn't matter how big a deal or small a deal we think any particular sin is. As far as God's concerned, all of that sin is rebellion against Him. All of that sin deserves death. And so hopefully as we get to the end of this passage and you sit and think about this passage, there'll be a realization that for us and for the people you meet in your day and the other people in your life around you, we really need someone to come in and solve this problem for us. Because we keep sinning, we keep rejecting God, we keep having a punishment deserved, which is death, and we really need someone to save us from that situation. Hopefully that's the feeling that you have. That's the feeling which Paul wants you to have, because the good news is he's going to continue on, and we'll keep learning about this at Sumo, and we'll read more about it next week. That the gospel, the good news, is that Jesus has come to solve this problem. Spend a couple of minutes now reflecting on this passage of Scripture, praying about it, and we'll see you in a couple of days.